It was January. Proper winter. I was living in a small place on the edge of town, one of those older suburban streets where the houses are close together, but you still barely see anyone once it gets cold. My partner was away visiting family for a few days. Work was slow, so I took a couple days off and stayed home. Nothing dramatic. Just me, a warm house, and that familiar routine of getting up, making coffee, doing a few chores, watching something, going back to bed early because it is dark by late afternoon. The cold mattered more than I realized. Not in a scary way. It just changed the way I moved. You close doors quickly. You do not open windows. You do not step outside unless you need to. You live inside the house like it is a sealed container. The first thing I noticed was the back mat. We had a rubber mat just inside the back door, the kind with ridges that hold melted snow and dirt. It always sat crooked because one corner curled up. I had tried to flatten it with books. It never stayed. That morning, when I went to take the rubbish out, it was flat. Not just flatter. Fully flat, corners down, lined up square with the tiles like it had been replaced. I paused with my gloves half on and looked at it for longer than I should have. My first thought was that the cold must have stiffened it and forced it down. That felt reasonable, so I accepted it. I stepped over it, opened the back door, and got hit with that sharp air that makes your nose feel clean. Outside was normal. Snow piled along the fences. No footprints on my side of the yard because I had not been out yet. That part was almost satisfying. When I came back in, I noticed the door did not thud the way it normally did. It always stuck slightly, like the seal on the frame was thick. You had to pull it closed with a bit of force, and it made a dull sound. This time it shut smoothly, almost quietly, and the latch clicked on the first try. That should not have been a big deal, but it made me stop again because it meant something had changed in the way the door was sitting. Either the seal had shifted, or the frame had expanded or contracted, or something was caught in it. I checked the bottom edge for snow. Nothing. I checked the seal with my fingers, pressing along it. It felt the same as always. I told myself the house was just moving with the temperature. The rest of the morning was nothing. Coffee, emails, a load of laundry. It got dark early and the light outside went that dull blue color you get in winter, like the world is under glass. I did not go anywhere. I did not talk to anyone. I was comfortable. Around mid-afternoon, I realized the living room was warmer than it should have been. I do not mean cozy. I mean noticeably warm, like someone had turned the thermostat up a few degrees. I keep it at the same setting all winter because I hate wasting money, and I know exactly how warm it feels. I even have a stupid habit of checking it when I walk past, like I am confirming it is still mine. I walked over and looked. The thermostat was still set where it always was. I stood there and waited for the heating to cycle off. It did not. It kept running. That soft, steady sound through the vents. I held my hand near one vent and felt warm air. My next thought was that maybe it was struggling because of the cold, so it was running longer to maintain the same temperature. That also felt reasonable, so I accepted it, but it stayed in my head, like a note I had not filed properly. Later, when I went to make dinner, the kitchen window was unlocked. That window faces the side yard. It is small and high up. I never unlock it in winter. I do not even touch it. The latch has a little metal tab that points down when locked and sideways when not. It was sideways. I remember feeling annoyed at myself before I felt anything else. Like, when did I do that? Why would I do that? I stood on a chair and tried to open it, just to check if it was actually unlatched or if the tab was loose. It was unlatched. The window was shut but not locked. I locked it, climbed down, and stared at it like it might do something. It did not. The thing is, none of those were scary. They were just small changes that could be explained by cold, by house movement, by me not paying attention. If it had stayed like that, I would never think about it again. But it kept going, in a way that made it hard to build one clean explanation. That night, I put a mug in the sink and noticed there was already water in it. Not a lot, just a shallow pool in the bottom, like it had been rinsed and left. But I had taken that mug from the cupboard less than an hour earlier. It had been dry. I remember because the cupboard door squeaks, and I always nudge it closed with my hip, and I can picture the mug in my hand, light and dry. I picked it up and tipped it out and stared at the inside like it would show me what happened. It did not. It was just water. I did a slow walk through the house, not searching for an intruder, more like checking my own memory. Bedroom, bathroom, spare room, everything in place. Windows closed, doors locked, nothing out of order. Outside it was silent. No cars, no neighbors. The snow absorbed everything. Even my own footsteps felt rude. I slept badly, but not because I heard noises. I slept badly because the house felt slightly different, and I could not name why. The next day I got up and found the front porch light was on. I never leave it on during the day. It is on a sensor that turns it on at night and off in the morning. It is one of those little systems you trust without thinking. It was on, full brightness, in daylight. I walked to the front door and looked at it through the glass. It was on. I opened the door and the cold hit my face. The light was warm against the snow. I checked the switch inside. It was in the correct position. The sensor should have done its job. I flipped it off and back on. It worked. I left it off and closed the door. That should have been the point where I called someone and said, "Hey, something weird is going on." But it still felt too small to report, too easy to explain away. A sensor glitch, a latch I forgot, a mug I misremembered. By late afternoon, I started doing something I had never done before in my own house. I started placing things in very specific ways just so I could later prove to myself I was not imagining it. I placed a book flat on the hallway table with the spine perfectly aligned to the edge. I placed the remote on the arm of the couch with the buttons facing up. I closed the bathroom door until the latch just caught, not fully clicked. I did it quietly, like I was trying not to be noticed by the house itself. Then I sat and watched TV until the windows went black and the room became a reflection of itself. At some point I went to get a glass of water and noticed the book on the hallway table was turned. Not moved far, just rotated a little, like someone had set it down without caring about alignment. The spine was still near the edge, but not squared. My stomach dropped in a slow way, not like panic, more like disappointment, like the simple explanations were running out, and I did not want anything else. I checked the remote. It was still on the couch arm, but it was upside down. I checked the bathroom door. It was fully shut, latched firmly. I stood in the hallway and waited for my own brain to offer a new explanation, and it did not. It just went blank. I remember the feeling of being inside a warm, safe suburban house, and suddenly not feeling like the person who controlled it. I did another walk through the rooms. Slower. I opened closets. I checked behind shower curtains. I checked the basement door, even though it was always locked, and I hated going down there because it was cold and unfinished. Nothing. Everything normal. That was the part that made it worse. The house did not look disturbed. It looked lived in. I did not call the police. I did not leave. I did not have a single clear event to point to. I just sat in the living room with every light on, waiting for my partner to come home the next day, and feeling stupid because I knew how it sounded in my head. When they got back, I told them the short version. Windows, lights, little things. They laughed at first, then saw my face and stopped. They checked the locks with me. They listened. They suggested explanations. They did all the normal supportive things. Nothing happened after that. At least nothing I noticed. The porch light behaved. The window stayed locked. The mat curled again like it always did. But I still think about that week in January, when the cold made the house feel sealed off from the outside world, and the only evidence I had that something was wrong was that the house stopped lining up with my own memory. If you enjoyed that story, like the video and click subscribe. Now let's move on to the next. It was one of those Australian January days where the heat starts early and never really leaves. Bright morning, sharp light through the blinds, and the kind of air that feels already used by 9 a.m. I was renting a small suburban unit at the time. Nothing fancy. Little front yard, a carport, a back patio with a clothesline, neighbors close enough that you could hear their doors open and shut. My housemate was away for the weekend. I was alone in the place, which felt normal. In summer, being home alone does not feel isolating the way it does in winter. You can hear people outside. You hear lawnmowers, kids, the distant sound of a TV through an open window. It feels like the world is right there. That day I had plans to do basically nothing. I had groceries, I had aircon, and I wanted to spend the afternoon on the couch with a fan blowing at my face. I remember thinking it was going to be a good, lazy day. The first part of it was completely ordinary. I went to the shops mid-morning, came back with cold drinks and ice. The car was an oven when I got in, the steering wheel hot enough to sting. I got home and did that quick shuffle from the car to the door, arms full, keys fumbling, already sweaty. When I walked inside, the unit was stifling. I turned on the aircon straight away and stood under it for a second, like it was a reward. Here's the choice I made, and it still feels reasonable when I say it out loud. I left the front door on the security chain. Not open. The door was shut and locked, but the chain was hooked, so it sat open a few centimeters at the top. The idea was airflow. The hallway in that unit trapped heat, and even with aircon, it took ages to cool. With the chain on, you could get a little bit of air movement without fully having the door open to the street. People do it all the time in summer, especially during the day. It felt safe. I was in the lounge room anyway. I could hear everything. It was bright outside. Neighbors were around. I remember thinking, I will close it later once the place cools down. I put the groceries away, made a drink, and sat down. The fan was on. The aircon was working. The usual summer noise was out there. Cicadas, birds, the occasional car. Hours went by. I watched a couple episodes of something and half-scrolled my phone. At some point I dozed off, which is not unusual when you are in that cold aircon bubble. When I woke up it was still light out, but the sun had shifted so the lounge room looked different. Shadows in different places. That sleepy confusion you get when you nap in the afternoon. I got up and went to the kitchen. The front door was still on the chain, which I noticed because a thin stripe of light was cutting across the hallway floor. I remember hearing someone outside then. Not talking, just footsteps on the concrete path. It did not alarm me because people walk past all the time. Then I heard a knock. Not pounding, just a light knock, like a neighbor with a question. I walked toward the hallway and called out, just a second, like you do. I was barefoot, still groggy. I did not look through the peephole. I did not ask who it was. I just went to the door and leaned in. Through the gap where the chain held it, I could see a man's shoulder and part of his face, close enough that I could smell sunscreen. He said something casual, like, "Hey, sorry to bother you, is this number 14 or 16? He spoke like he belonged there, like he had walked up the wrong path. I said, "It's 14. He thanked me. That should have been it. But instead of stepping back, he leaned forward slightly and looked into the hallway. It was subtle. It could have been nothing, but it felt like he was not looking at me. He was looking past me, into the unit, like he was checking how far in the living room was, whether someone else was there, whether there were shoes by the door, anything. I remember feeling a small pinch of irritation, like you do not do that. You do not look into someone's home. I shifted my body a bit to block his view and said, "Can I help you with anything else?" My tone was polite, but flat. He smiled, still friendly, and said no, all good. Then, and this is the part that made my stomach tighten, his hand reached up and touched the door edge near the chain. Not grabbing it, just resting his fingers there, like he was absent-minded. It made me aware of how little that chain really was. I said okay and started to close the door. I slid the chain off and locked it properly. I did it quickly but tried not to look like I was doing it out of fear. I walked back to the lounge room and sat down. The aircon hummed. The fan blew. The normal day continued. I told myself it was nothing. Someone got the wrong address. People are weird. I was overreacting. A little later, I went to take the rubbish out to the outside bin. The bins were in a small shared area near the carport. When I opened my front door, I paused and listened first. I do not know why, just habit suddenly. I stepped out and walked down the path. My neighbor across the way was outside, watering plants. She gave me a wave. I waved back and asked, did someone come by asking about numbers? She said, not that she saw. I put the rubbish in the bin, turned back, and noticed something on my doormat. A single key. Not my key. It was an older house key, slightly worn, sitting on the edge of the mat like it had been placed there carefully. It was not there earlier. I would have noticed it when I brought groceries in. It was too obvious. I stared at it, and my first thought was, maybe it is the guy's. Maybe he dropped it and did not notice. Or maybe it belongs to a neighbor. Then I had the uncomfortable thought that someone had stood at my door again after the first time, placed it there, left. I picked it up. It was warm from the sun. I turned it over in my fingers like it would tell me who it belonged to. No markings, just a key. I did not take it inside. I do not know why. It felt wrong to bring it into the house. I walked straight to my neighbor and asked if it was hers. She looked at it and said no, not hers. She asked where I found it. I said on my mat. She asked if I knew who put it there. I said no. Her face changed slightly then, just a tightening around her eyes. She said, you should probably call your housemate and let them know, and make sure all your windows are locked. I went back inside and checked everything. Windows, doors, the back screen door. They were locked. The unit was small. There was not much to check. But I kept thinking about how the man had leaned forward, how his fingers had rested on the door edge like he was testing what was stopping him. I kept thinking about the key. Why leave a key? It did not make sense. I did not call the police because what would I say? A man asked for an address, and now there is a key on my doormat. It sounds ridiculous. So I did nothing official. I told my housemate when they got back, and we agreed to be more careful. We laughed about it because that was easier than admitting it felt off. The key stayed with me for weeks. I kept it in a drawer. I meant to hand it in somewhere, but where do you hand in a random key? Eventually I threw it out. Months later, I saw a post in a local community Facebook group about a string of daytime break-ins around our area. People said the same thing in the comments. Someone would knock, ask a harmless question, look inside, then come back later when the house seemed empty. I read it with that slow, sick feeling you get when a memory suddenly fits into a pattern. That is when I regretted the choice I made, not because it was wildly reckless, but because it was so normal, so summer casual, door on the chain for airflow, bright day, people outside, everything feeling safe. And I still cannot shake the thought that my front door being slightly open told someone exactly what they needed to know about me. If you enjoyed that story, like the video and click subscribe. Now let's move on to the next. It was a weekday afternoon. I was home alone because I had a day off. I lived in a pretty standard suburb, in a house I'd grown up in. By then my parents had moved out, and I was renting it from them while I saved money. It still had their old furniture, their old habits built into it. The house felt like a familiar hoodie, comfortable, predictable. I'd been doing small chores all day, laundry, vacuuming, that boring stuff. At some point, I decided I'd clean out the pantry because it was overdue. Our pantry was one of those tall cupboards in the kitchen, shelves full of half-used things, cans, cereal, spices. I opened it and started taking things out onto the bench. I remember seeing something and laughing out loud because it was so dated, a packet of rice that expired years ago. I tossed it straight into the bin. Then I saw a second thing that made me pause, but not in a scary way. It was a takeaway napkin, one of those thick white ones with a logo. It was folded neatly and tucked between boxes. I thought, that's weird. I don't get takeaway much. I unfolded it and saw the logo for a local pizza place I hadn't been to in ages. My assumption was simple. It must have been from my parents' time, shoved in there. I tossed it. No big deal. I kept cleaning. I was in that mindless mode where you're half thinking about what you'll make for dinner, half listening to a podcast. Later, I took a break and sat in the living room with a snack. I remember because I turned on the TV and got annoyed that the volume was on a weird number. Not my number. I always leave it at the same level. This was louder. I shrugged it off. Could have been me last night. At around 5, I went back into the kitchen and noticed the back sliding door was unlocked. That door is usually locked because it's easy to forget otherwise. I have this habit where I lock it almost without thinking, but it wasn't locked. The handle was down. The door was shut, but not locked. Again, my brain went for the easiest explanation. Maybe I'd been going in and out with laundry and left it. I locked it, told myself to stop being sloppy, and moved on. In the evening, I cooked dinner, ate at the counter. Normal, quiet. I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel like something was wrong. That's what makes it worse. The next morning, I woke up and noticed something in the hallway that made me stop with my toothbrush in my mouth. The hallway picture frame, one of those family photos, was slightly crooked. It wasn't hanging off the wall, just a few degrees crooked. I straightened it and thought, house settling, vibration, whatever. Then I went into the kitchen and noticed the pantry door wasn't fully closed. It was open a crack. I remember feeling mildly annoyed, like I thought I shut that. I pushed it closed. That's the whole story so far, just little things. None of them individually mattered, and I didn't connect them, not then. It wasn't until 3 days later that it snapped into place. I had a mate come over, just to hang out. We were in the kitchen making coffee, and he opened the pantry looking for sugar. He paused and said, "Why do you have that?" I looked over, and he was holding something small, folded. It was another takeaway napkin, thick white, folded neatly, same logo, same pizza place. I felt this sudden cold irritation, not fear. Irritation first, because I'd thrown one out. I was sure I'd thrown it out. I remember the motion of tossing it into the bin. I said, "That was in there the other day, I binned it." He laughed like I was being dramatic. "Maybe you didn't." So I did the petty thing. I opened the bin outside. I dug through the top layer with a stick because I didn't want to touch it. It was gross, but I wanted to prove a point to myself. The napkin wasn't in there. The old rice packet I'd binned was there. The other pantry rubbish was there. No napkin. I stood there staring into the bin like it would confess something. I went back inside and took the napkin from him. I unfolded it. It had a date stamp on it. I didn't even know they did that. Tiny little printed stamp on the corner. It wasn't obvious unless you looked. The date was from that week, 2 days earlier. I stared at it for a long time before it meant anything. My brain didn't want it to mean anything. Because I hadn't ordered pizza. I hadn't been to that place. I hadn't had anyone over. I'd been alone. The only way that napkin could have ended up in my pantry was if someone else brought it into my house, and then everything else rearranged itself in my head. The TV volume being wrong wasn't random. The back door being unlocked wasn't me being sloppy. The pantry door being open wasn't me forgetting. The first napkin, the one I tossed, might not have been old at all. I'd assumed it was from years ago because the logo felt familiar, and I wanted a simple explanation, but I never checked it for a date stamp. I threw it out, or thought I did. My mate kept talking, asking if I was okay, but I wasn't listening. I was remembering the small pauses I'd had that week, and how quickly I'd brushed past them. I went through the house like I was seeing it for the first time. I checked locks, windows, the garage. I couldn't find anything open or broken. No obvious entry point. That was the part that really lodged in my chest, because it suggested the entry point might have been normal, like a door I'd left unlocked for 10 minutes while taking laundry out, like a sliding door that looks shut but isn't latched, like the kind of mistake you make without thinking, because you've lived there forever and nothing bad has ever happened. That night I barely slept. Not because I heard noises, because I kept replaying the pantry clean-out and imagining that someone had been in the house while I was home. Not sprinting around, not tearing drawers open, just moving lightly, leaving something behind, taking something small, adjusting the volume, testing a door, closing the pantry almost all the way. A few days after that, I had the locks changed. I installed a camera at the back door. I became the kind of person who double-checks everything. But the story doesn't have a clean ending. The camera never caught anyone. Nothing was stolen in a way I could prove. No dramatic confrontation. Just that napkin with a date on it, folded neatly in my pantry like it belonged there. And the part I hate admitting is that if my mate hadn't asked, I might have unfolded it, thought, huh, and thrown it away again.